Today's discussion will be presented in 3 sections since we are recording this session for a radio broadcast on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Feel free to post questions and comments during the session and we'll try to get them answered online. We are particularly pleased to welcome our moderator, Tom Temin, host of the Federal Drive on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. So let me turn over the reins to Tom to begin today's discussion.
Welcome and thanks for joining us. Our guests today are Shawn Kingsberry. He's the CIO of the Recovery, Accountability, and Transparency Board. Kimberly Hansher is CIO of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Andre Mendes is Director of Global Operations for the Broadcasting Board of Governors. Darren House, Director of Solutions Management at Avnet Government Solutions. And Rana, Senior Systems Engineering Manager for the Partner Ecosystem at NetApp. And just to set the scene for you all, I just want to kind of go over what it is we plan to discuss today for you and for our audience. The data center has become the focal point for several IT initiatives and trends. The consolidation initiative might be reducing the number of data centers, but that's only the beginning of the story. Agencies find they also need to update and optimize the data centers they do keep. They're also re-evaluating how users and applications interact with those data centers, and this is all driven by the need to balance dedicated use in the client server or web application model, shared services in the software or infrastructure as a service model, and the emergence of the cloud as part of the extended infrastructure. So it's a pretty complicated environment that we're all working in. And to kind of set the baseline, I wanted to ask the federal members of the panel today just to give us a quick overview of the status of data center for your agency as it is now. And if that includes any cloud providers, you really have to count those nowadays as part of the data center. So Kimberly, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is a small independent agency. We've got 24,000 people. Most of our workforce is in the field, and we have 53 field sites. The headquarters office here in Washington, D.C. is the largest site, so we have about 450 people at the headquarters. And we have a data center in our building. I've been with the agency for about 6 years, and my first big challenge, really, was data center consolidation. We had to move 5 months after my start date, and so I really had to get a handle on our entire asset inventory quickly. And what we did was we consolidated in place before the move. So when it came to move time, it was literally shrink wrap the racks, roll them out to trucks, and count the trucks coming over, and then plug them back in at the new site. Another early decision that I made was to establish a contract with a hosting provider. And that was in 2008, so it was before the word cloud came about. But it is a cloud provider, and it allows us to ramp up and ramp down applications, our website, hosting, and a number of disaster recovery initiatives that we've put in place over these several years.
All right, good. And Andre, Broadcasting Board of Governors, interesting setup at the agency there.
Yeah, because we are an audio and video environment, our data centers are somewhat different. And so we have data centers at each one of our transmitting stations and satellite uplink places throughout the entire world. But at the Cohen building at our headquarters, when I came on board, we had 11 data centers. Some of them, really shouldn't be called that, but they were. And so we had to go through a substantial consolidation phase. We put in place a four-step process, which is, consolidation, virtualization, co-location, and cloud computing. And so the first step was to really get down from 11 into 3 that could accommodate all of our needs within the building. And when we did that through a substantial amount of virtualization right off the bat. So before we even went to the cloud, we had about 90% of our applications completely virtualized, except for the ones that weren't capable of doing so. So a substantial amount of consolidation, but already a look into the future as we were going to move it out of the environment.
All right, so 11 to 3, 11 in one building.
Trust me, the environment was a little bit chaotic, and if a closet had servers in it, we called it a data center, and those no longer exist.
All right, good. Shawn, your agency is new, relatively, but even the legacy agency that it grew out of is only a few years old.
Right.
So tell us about what you've got built up and what you're looking at.
Okay, so the Recovery Board was created in 2009, and at that point, we were really running out of a data center where you look at SAVIS for externally facing services like recovery.gov at that time, and for federalreport.gov that was out of the CGI data center, and then for internal services, the board has its own in-house operated and run data center. So as we got into 2011, that's when we actually started to look at things a little differently and started to leverage cloud services. So we actually migrated off of the SAVIS physical data center into the Amazon cloud for, again, externally facing services. And that was addressing several COOP and DR requirements that was in we leveraged our task orders off of our contract from a COOP standpoint and met all of those requirements. And that actually worked really great. But then as we got into 2012, with the signing of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2012, we actually then transformed our internal data center as well, where we actually converted that to a private cloud construct, and then we started to leverage other cloud services like mail and collaboration to Microsoft 365. Mm-hmm. Other infrastructure as a services we rolled over to like Amazon. In parallel, completely virtualized the entire infrastructure for workloads that it made sense to, which was really about 85 to 90% of the services, except for things like in-memory computing, like leveraging HANA and those types of things for fraud analytics. So now we're at a much different place now, because now we are in a hybrid cloud configuration, leveraging most cloud providers, but in parallel, we're looking at ways to do further segregation for higher categorized data sets, as we're actually providing, services to several external federal agencies.
Right, and as the Recovery Board sort of transforms into the main board that follows all of federal spending, I realize that's a work in progress. Do you have the infrastructure to support that?
We have the construct. When you look at, that's what the whole conversation about data center, I think we need to look at data centers differently. We have a construct that enables us to support growth at all levels, right? Because all our focus is on security and delivering services and performance. So in essence, with the Cloud Hub stack, I have the ability to throw workloads anywhere and have full visibility of the data and manage it in a way that makes sense, leveraging centralized authentication and authorization. Right, so it doesn't matter how we need to scale up or what have you. We can do it in a way that's responsible, cost-effective, and meet all levels of security requirements.
All right, good. And Darren, moving over to the industry side of Darren House from Avnet Government Solutions, you've looked at this from the vendor point of view now for some time. Does it look different when you look across government now than it did 3 years ago or 5 years ago?
So it's definitely looking different. There's, in any point in the government, there's different levels of maturity and different levels of where they've achieved some successes and where they're having some struggles. And a lot of the times, those are based off of financial or cultural issues or contractual issues more than technology issues. But technology can sometimes be a problem as well. I think on Shawn's side, he's on the far right edge of being an advanced adopter in the things that they have done. And I applaud the work that they've done there, because it looks like they're really on track there, and it's pretty impressive. It's hard for other agencies to get there, especially the agencies that have a legacy infrastructure where they have to figure out how to do the Tetris game of moving pieces around to be able to get to that point. And that legacy issue is a huge barrier. But I'd say it's all over the map. In some places, they're really doing well. In some places, they're still struggling.
All right, so yeah, mixed bag for sure. I mean, Rana from NetApp, there is a lot of not only policy change with respect to consolidation, But there's also a lot of technological change occurring across all of computing right now as all these mobility comes in, can get that word out. Virtualization moves deeper and deeper into the infrastructure, not just the applications. So what's your view of how government is, say, compared to industry or compared to some best practice metric right now in their status of not only consolidating but also modernizing?
Sure. So it is actually very interesting. There's been quite a bit of change in the industry as a whole, right? So as a publicly traded company, we're the number one storage provider to the federal government, but we have a very large commercial practice as well. And so that really affords us the visibility into monitoring commercial trends and how things are growing on that side, and actually using it to juxtapose that against what we're seeing in the federal space. And I think that on the commercial side, there is more freedom to take more aggressive leaps, if you will, than we see on the federal side. But the federal side has really matured very rapidly. There is a series of there are a number of technology trends that are driving adoption, that are driving some of these changes. You mentioned you alluded to some of the policy changes, but from a technology perspective, virtualization has definitely been a big push. I think that one of the other things that we're seeing is as these data centers are consolidating, people are using this as an opportunity to review their workloads and determining what makes sense to move over. Certain things make sense in a shared infrastructure, and then there's other things that make sense in really more of a dedicated environment based off of the characteristics of that workload. Technology is changing. Our approach is really, where we've been successful is to follow our approach of not trying to broad brush everything, but identifying those workloads, those specific use cases, and ensuring that we're providing the right technology to match those workloads to provide the efficiencies that Shawn and Andres were referring to earlier.
Yeah, and Andre, let's return to that question. You said you did virtualization where you could, but some applications can't be. What were your criteria, besides yes or no, on what you virtualized first, in terms of workload, was it, or complexity or number of users?
Because of the environment that we've inherited, it was a relatively simple equation. Most of the workload was very, very capable of being virtualized. The only things that we couldn't virtualize were things that were so CPU intensive that wouldn't make sense. When you're talking about video conversions from a format to another format, so that you can have not only your presence on TV broadcasts, but also simultaneously through all of the internet channels, it just doesn't make sense to virtualize that.
You probably have a computer dedicated to just doing that.
Yeah, we have a substantial number of servers that do nothing but compress our streams in real time, so that all of the populations throughout the world can consume them, whether they are on terrestrial TV, on satellite TV, on the internet, on YouTube channels. As a broadcast organization that operates throughout the entire world in over 100 countries, we actually have the widest technology portfolio for distribution of any company in the world, and so we need to make sure that everything that we do is capable of being distributed through all of those different channels. So, virtualization and that type of CPU-intensive, computing, it just doesn't work out. But for everything else, it was a no-brainer. It was, the first decision that we made. It was either going to go to the cloud or through virtualization, and eventually everything went to the cloud. Yeah. Yeah, just about everything that we are doing now is on the cloud as far as applications are concerned, or with third-party providers such as CGI, for example, with some of the shared services model that is so prevalent in the government.
Okay, and Kimberly, with the new building and the new data center, now I guess you've been there a couple of years now,
Yes,
EEOC, over in Northeast D.C. What is your level of virtualization, and how does that overlay with the degree of cloud that you're using?
Well, we started to do virtualization a couple years ago, and we started really slow and did several applications that were just clearly excellent candidates for virtualization. We used the hypervisor that comes with the operating system, and we then brought in a third party to review what we've done, make some suggestions before we really move forward in virtualizing almost all of our servers in the data center. So that was really valuable. We got some good recommendations, some fine-tuning ideas, And I felt much more confident having a independent party look at it in moving forward. And I have to say that it's made us much more agile in terms of being able to provide an environment when we need, or to balance out environments when we need to. And it's also helped in determining, like we were talking about workload and how that's such a key component. So one of the things that we've been doing is trying to focus most on what we do the best, and what we don't do the best, that's where we put into external providers and external cloud providers.
Okay, and quickly before we go to a break, I wanted to ask Raj what virtualization does to storage requirements. Do they go up? Do they go down? Do they differ in some way from what they were?
Yeah, so if virtualization actually does make an impact on storage, and if you don't look at it from a holistic view, it could lead to problems, right? If not done properly, it could actually significantly increase your amount of storage spend. That's not returning a value to your mission. So there are connections that we have to the different hypervisor providers to ensure that there are strong connections between them, to ensure that there is a agile approach to rolling these out, an efficient approach to managing the systems, to managing the different images that you may have, and also to ensure that the performance that for these hypervisors, these images that are running on the storage system, that the performance is actually matching and provided.
So I think the key word you said there is a holistic approach. You really have to look at your data center not as an application or a machine, but as an entity that's living, and how do you optimize it across the board?
Tom, that's exactly correct. You can't just look at one component. If you look at just the compute side and try to solve the problem by throwing more compute cycles, you may find that it's more effective to make changes on the storage backend, and vice versa, depending on what you're looking at. So 100% correct. The holistic view is one you definitely need to explore.
Okay, on that note, we're going to explore this a little bit further, but right now we need to take a short break. Our guests today are Rana, Senior Systems Engineering Manager for the partner ecosystem at NetApp, Darren House, the Director of Solutions Management at Avnet Government Solutions, Andre Mendes, Director of Global Operations for the Broadcasting Board of Governors, Kimberly Hancher, the CIO of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and Shawn Kingsberry, the CIO of the Recovery, Accountability, and Transparency Board. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This is The Future of Government Data Centers, sponsored by Avnet, Government Solutions, and NetApp, here on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.